She handed me divorce papers live on air. 10 million people watched, and she actually smiled. The red live light flicked on 8:04 p.m. sharp. Cameras zeroed in on her. The whole country stared. And that's when my wife decided to ruin me. Betty Roger stood behind the anchor desk, red blazer, white envelope in hand, calm, confident, like she'd already won. She didn't look at the crowd or at the camera. She looked straight at me and grinned. "Won," she said, voice smooth as glass. "I think the world deserves to know the truth about us." Silence swallowed the studio. Even the crew froze. This wasn't in the rundown. She stepped out, holding the envelope. "These are divorce papers," she announced, "and I want everyone watching to know why you never deserved the life I built. Let me ask you, have you ever watched someone publicly destroy someone else using their own resources? Because that's exactly what she thought she was doing. She just hadn't figured it out yet. 10 million people waited for me to crack, yell, plead, break down. I didn't give them what they wanted." I stood there, unmoving, calm, because I already knew how this ended. What nobody on the other side of the screen realized, not even Betty, was this. The studio she stood in, mine. The cameras filming her, mine. The network blasting her words across the world, also mine. Every wire, floor, and flickering monitor, my name on every contract. She was burning me down on a platform I built from scratch, and she thought she had the upper hand. The camera hung on my face a few seconds longer than it should have. That live sign glowed like a warning behind her, but she couldn't see it. Pride had blinded her. And that's the dangerous thing about pride. It makes sharks think they're swimming with minnows. She thought I was nothing to fear. Have you ever seen someone humiliate a person in public? Then help me prove my mother wrong. She said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Please hit the like button, leave a comment where you are watching from, and subscribe. Stick with me, because 14 hours before all hell broke loose, I found out this wasn't just a simple divorce. It was something bigger. A hostile takeover. 6:22 a.m. The city was still draped in darkness when I opened the file on my desk. One name jumped out. Stephen Barr. The same guy who tried for 3 years to snap up my company, and now my wife was working with him. She wasn't leaving me. She was cashing out on everything I'd built. I kept digging. Board minutes, sneaky deals, bribed directors, votes happening behind my back. She figured I'd never notice, but I'd wired this company down to the screws. Every contract, every clause, every loophole, I wrote them. And deep in that stack of paperwork, she missed the fine print. A founder override clause. 11 years old, written for the day someone moved against me. I closed the folder, watched the city wake up, and made up my mind. I didn't call Betty. No warning, no cancellation. By 8:04 p.m., she'd be standing in my studio, facing my cameras, telling her story to my audience. And I'd let her. Every single word. Then I'd show her exactly who she'd pick to fight with. I never craved the limelight. Some men need spotlights and applause. I tracked revenue and wiring diagrams. By the time Betty landed her first anchor job, Low Group already held the broadcast license that let her speech reach the world. She had no idea I never told her. Results first, ego last. When contractors quoted $180,000 for installing fiber lines, I crawled through the 3rd floor and finished it in 14 hours myself, spending just $31,400 on materials. That's how you build something to last. Here's something nobody mentions about real power. It doesn't need a megaphone. It keeps the lights on, quietly. People saw Betty's name on the building and thought they knew the story. They were right, just not the whole way. For 8 years, I fixed every problem before it broke, and I never demanded anyone applaud. Page 47, subsection 9C, my line, written 11 years ago. Untouched since. Nobody figured they'd need it. Betty thought she built something I needed her permission to enter, but she built it all inside something I already owned. It all started with a system flag, not a tip, a safeguard I installed years ago, tracking unauthorized access to sensitive files. It had never triggered. Until now. I opened the alert. 14 pages, fully scripted, polished, graphics and music cues already set. She planned this for 6 weeks. Gerald Ferry, on our board for 4 years, my pick, sat through every annual review, never brought up Stephen Barr's name once. Arthur Collado, Roger Media's CFO since year 2, the guy who knew where every cent was stacked, so he knew exactly what game they were playing. They cut a deal, $340 million for an asset they didn't even own, never bothered to tell the man holding the controlling stake. Understand something, I wasn't angry. Anger is for people who get blindsided. I had engineered a trap for this exact move years ago. Get me legal. My attorney Marcus has been with me 9 years. When he hears that tone, he doesn't ask questions, he moves. The override is clean, he said. No one's challenged it. You can execute it any time. That clause was written on a kitchen table. My mentor's idea. Never build something you can't take back. Ferry and Collado countersigned the memo, I told Marcus. He didn't even blink. They breached fiduciary duty. You can fire them for cause right now, once the board knows. I didn't sign the termination letters just yet. Not yet, I told him. The show has to run. He said, 1. She's going to serve those papers tonight, live. 10 million people will see it. I want everyone watching when the feed cuts. He said we'd need to trigger the morality clause at the exact same time. Publicly undermining the founding officer meant Betty's authority was instantly suspended. Marcus would have the paperwork ready by noon. She drafted the weapon that would finish her. One more thing. The floor director, Raymond Osei. Marcus looked up. He's audited Betty's finances for 18 months on my orders. Make sure he's on deck tonight. No questions. Marcus wrote it down. That was everything. By 6:58 a.m., my entire plan was loaded. All that was left was the night. I didn't call ahead. I signed in at reception like any stranger, then took the elevator to the 4th floor. She was in hair and makeup. I knocked, opened the door. She looked at me through the mirror, never directly, like she needed the glass to buffer whatever power I had over the space. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. "I own the building," I replied. "I belong wherever I want." I sat across from her, nothing dramatic, just overdue honesty. "Don't do this tonight," I said. "It's done," she told me. "Segments locked, lawyers filed. It's happening, Juan." "I'm not asking you to stop the divorce," I said, leaning in. "Just don't drag it onto that set. Not tonight, not like this." She just asked, "Because it embarrasses you?" "Because you don't understand what comes after the cameras run." She turned back to the mirror. 15 minutes to air. You should find your seat." I already had one. She started the show like always, shoulders back, voice smooth, eyes dead ahead. She was pure pro, and everyone watching knew it. "Good evening," she began. "Tonight I'll tell you what it costs to build something and what happens when the wrong person claims the credit." She reached down, pulled out the envelope.
"Juan," she stared at camera one, not at me, right at the audience. "These are your divorce papers, and everyone watching should know why I'm done hauling dead weight." Ever watch someone light their own fuse, thinking it makes them a hero? Here's what Betty didn't see. The final piece had just fallen into place. She gathered herself to deliver her last line, then something shifted. 1 second. 2. In the control room, confusion flared. "What's happening? Somebody get system status now!" Betty tried to stay poised. 20 years on air teaches you to handle just about any silence. She reached for the same composure that had carried her through every storm. "We're experiencing a brief..." But 10 million people saw it happen. Not a glitch, not a failure, but a declaration. Raymond Osei, the floor director, stepped into view. He'd waited 8 years for these 11 seconds of silence. Betty found her voice first. "Cut the feed," she told the control room, calm, commanding. "Cut it now." No response. "The feed can't be cut from up here anymore," came the answer. Raymond's voice carried. "Ms. Roger, I am a licensed forensic auditor. For 11 years I've been floor director at Roger Media. For the past 18 months I've been conducting a financial review of executive accounts on orders from the Low Group's founding chairman." He continued, "We've identified $2.3 million in unauthorized personal spending charged to Roger Media's operating budget. 17 wire transfers to Bar Media Group accounts starting 11 months before the acquisition proposal went to the board." Betty had been leaking information to Stephen Barr for a year. All the while, I paid the bills and kept the network alive. Raymond pulled out a drive. Full audit on this, filed with the SEC, the FCC, and Low Group's legal counsel as of 5:58 this morning. 90 seconds, 11 years of work. I walked up to camera one, looked straight into the audience. "Good evening. My name is Juan Roger. I am the founding chairman of the Low Group, the company that owns Roger Media, its broadcast licenses, towers, contracts, and yes, every camera in this studio. The network my wife claimed as hers was built with Low Group capital. We bought the broadcast license 14 months before Roger Media even aired. Tonight, this network was used to attack a founding officer of its parent company. That is a material breach of the morality clause in the original contract.
That clause doesn't require a board vote or advance notice. The act, already public, here in front of millions, is enough. Effective immediately, Betty Rogers' executive authority over Roger Media is suspended pending full legal review. I set down my one page next to her divorce papers. She tried to end me on my own stage. I ended everything else with a single piece of paper. Marcus handed her a second envelope, silent. Contract terminated, effective tonight. Already filed at 7:02 a.m., minutes after we triggered the override, 13 hours before she served me those papers on live TV. They tried to sell what they didn't own, using authority they'd already lost, to a buyer who'd wake up and discover the deal was dead before it began. 340 million turned to dust in seconds. Betty left, personal items in hand, divorce papers behind, suspension letter too. She walked off the set that used to be hers, and the broadcast rolled on. I faced the camera. Roger Media will keep delivering honest, independent journalism under new editorial leadership starting Monday. For everyone who's trusted us, your trust was always in the right hands. Some men spend their lives fighting to get into rooms they already own. That night, I reminded them with 11 seconds of silence. And then I went home.